I think a lot of the problems with Naruto as a series can be chalked up to Kishimoto either biting off more than he can chew, or being restricted by the constraints of time, both of which are understandable. Characters get abandoned or forgotten, but that could easily be due to the overabundance in characters worth being the center of a story. If you have to release new stories every week, and you want to actually finish your story within any semi-reasonable amount of time, you can't feasibly tell a complete story about the over 400 characters you introduce. Obviously, not all of these characters are ones worth telling a story about, but I'd probably say at least 100 of these could carry a complete manga on their own. But if you want to actually get anywhere with your main story, eventually some of these characters end up sidelined. Lots of other problems can be chalked up to Kishimoto not knowing which way his story was going from the get-go. He didn't expect 700 issues. When you set up one character to be the strongest ninja in the world, but you need to scale power, it ends up being incongruent when you introduce more and more powerful shinobi over and over again. Likewise, if you set up one character as a villain, but later decide you want them to have been a secret good guy all along, it makes it awkward that you expect an audience to just ignore that your supposed secret good guy murdered several unarmed children. Though, what do I know, it seems like most of the fandom does. However, some of the problems are due not to the nature of storytelling or the story taking way longer to finish than most stories, but potentially due to some institutional prejudices. Now hear me out, I'm not saying that Kishimoto is a bad person, I'm not saying he's discriminatory, I really don't know the person, obviously, but I am saying elements in his works reflect the society he lives in, often to their detriment. Now don't get me wrong, in some ways Kishimoto does pretty well. People of all age groups and skin colors and body types are powerful, capable, fully developed characters in this series, and by Boruto, the most powerful shinobi include a wheelchair user, an amputee, a little person, and an obese man. Compared to several mainstream manga, Naruto's diversity is actually pretty great. However, Kishimoto does lack a little when it comes to gender representation. Depending on who you are, you probably either thought, well, duh, obviously, or, oh great, people finding anything to complain about. If you're the latter, please consider for a second before just leaving a hate comment. I'm not talking about there being far more male characters than female in the show. The narrative's centered around a voluntary military organization, which are usually majority male in the real world. I get that. I'm also not talking about the power level of the characters, or at least not specifically the power itself. Rock Lee, for example, is one of the most well-written and beloved characters in the series, and he seldom comes close to having success or even screen time outside of his own spin-off. Kishimoto puts Naruto and Sasuke above all else, and while that can hurt the story, it's not inherently sexist. No, I'm talking about the actual treatment of what time we do spend on the women and girls in Naruto. See, we do actually get some rather powerful women within the series, and while it's far from equitable, the ratio of characters is comparable to other shonen manga and anime. However, and again I think it's pretty obvious, plain sexual assault and harassment for laughs is a far sight worse. Now, I doubt that if you think spying on unsuspecting bathing people, hitting on a young girl you raised for years, and refusing to take no for an answer isn't sexist, anything I say in a decently length video won't be the thing to change your mind. However, obvious sexism is one horrible thing, which I could talk about, but there's also more subtle sexism where the series really suffers, and it goes beyond just in-universe sexism being ignored or treated as funny. Primarily, I think we see this with Haruno Sakura. Now, I personally think Sakura is a pretty great, or rather I should say, filled with potential, if underutilized character. Typically, a lot of fans have had a very negative reaction to Sakura, at least in the States and in the past. I say in the States because that's where I live and where I meet most of the people I know, and I say in the past because as of 2023, Sakura is currently the third most popular Naruto character behind only Minato and Itachi. A lot of fans still hate her, I'm sure, but it seems some of the fan base has mellowed. But if you're unfamiliar, Sakura is ostensibly one of Naruto's four main characters. She's an apprentice ninja along with Sasuke and Naruto under the tutelage of the fourth main character, Kakashi. While she's unquestionably the weakest of her team and one of the weakest in her generation at the start of the story, being the daughter of two ordinary people rather than some elite clan, she, through sheer hard work, discipline, and studying under her mentor Tsunade, becomes one of the most powerful ninja alive, able to deal an immense blow to the final boss of the series. Considering early Naruto talks a lot about how through sheer hard work you can overcome genetics and social gifts, but by the end of the series Naruto is both the son of one of the most lethal ninja in history and the reincarnation of a deity, Sakura ends up being the greatest example of overcoming your circumstances. Personality-wise, she's for the most part pretty enjoyable as well. As a young kid, she absolutely has some insensitivity issues, which are flaws which characters should have, and she's rightfully called out on those, but she works to become a more empathetic person as she goes on, focusing on healing in addition to her strength training and becoming a better person at the same time. If you just look at this description on paper, you can probably understand that there's a lot of potential here. You likely wouldn't see an inherent problem. And I feel like I need to reiterate because Sakura hate is so virulent, but I'm not saying she needed to be more powerful. No, for a supposedly main character, Sakura gets the big main character moments the other three do, but not the connections in between. Consider how we see the character progress. We see Naruto's origins and why he has immense chakra. We see him learn each of his new jutsu and follow him through his training. Chapters are dedicated to showing him learning under Jiraiya and Kakashi and Asuma and the Sage Toads and B. Each time he gets a level up, we watch him either work to earn it or see the connection that grants him it. Likewise, Sasuke evolves differently, but either in panel or on screen. Whether it's because a man assaulted him in the woods or his brother killed his whole family, his trauma leads to greater power. If you haven't seen the show or read the manga, he has these eyeballs that give him superpowers every time something messed up occurs. It's weird. When he needs to get stronger, we see the process of him acquiring and mastering new abilities. Even Kakashi, who is older than his students and starts out already thoroughly trained, we see keep up with his cardio, see a canon origin story for his powers, and see him develop new abilities. Sakura, on the other hand, develops almost all of her abilities off-panel. We see her train on healing a fish, but every time she does something impressive, and make no mistake, even though she's less powerful than the reincarnated gods, she is impressive, it's framed as a surprise that she's gotten stronger. Characters look with this aghast expression that she's been working hard, even though they should know she has. The anime filler at least gives a few episodes where we see her training, but in canon, while the others get to train and work harder, and we see their progression all the time, she has to work harder than just about anybody, but the audience is only told about the training after the fact, and briefly at that. So it's more like, hey, surprise, surprise, this woman has also been working really hard, and isn't that a shock? Many fans believe Sakura is useless out of sheer sexism, sure, but when we consider what she can do, she's a lifesaver and top-tier muscle. Her usefulness is unquestionable if you're actually engaging with the story, but when you compare how her usefulness creeps up, it almost makes sense that people don't recognize it as easily, or say it's out of nowhere. Could you imagine if Naruto learned the Rasengan, the Rasen Shuriken, Sage Mode, or Kurama Cloak off-panel? You'd probably think he got his powers out of nowhere too. While we're talking about her gaining power, we should talk about her motivation. I think, again, you could probably chalk up her not showing her training to bad writing and not specifically sexism. This part, not so much. On paper, there should be plenty of great reasons Sakura wants to become both a strong healer and a strong fighter. Her empathy could make her want to decrease the suffering around her. Her pride could make her want to just work on herself out of a sense of betterment. Her origins as somebody born outside of a ninja clan could make her want to prove that you don't need a special bloodline to be a hero. But instead, her motivation for training under Tsunade boils down to her feeling inadequate in comparison to Sasuke and Naruto, and wanting to actually help those two. Not only does this make her motivation incredibly shallow when it could be complex, it sets her up against a goal Kishimoto will never let her reach. If her goal is to help others avoid death or prove herself worthy of respect, she hits that goal in spades. But when her aim is to either be as powerful as the two cosmic entity level boys, or ones that they don't have to save, by the way Kishimoto writes it, she inevitably won't reach it. Again, compare this to Sasuke and Naruto. Sasuke's goal is to avenge his clan. Yes, this is directed towards his brother, and then towards Konoha, but he's doing this for his whole family, not one person. Naruto wants to become Hokage, and that's to prove a point to an entire village that treated him like trash, not to prove a point to a single person. But Sakura's a girl, so what motivates her? The two boys in her life. That isn't to say that her being interested in boys is an inherent problem either. Naruto has a crush on Sakura, Sakura has a crush on Sasuke, but Naruto and Sasuke aren't defined by Sakura like she's defined by them. It's also worth mentioning that Sakura ends up in a relationship with a man that is, at several points, very abusive to her, and to another girl that trusts him to protect her. There's even a scene where she tries to take Sasuke out when he's reached an incredibly evil point, but of course she gets over this distrust she has of him once his anger is magically resolved after he gets beat up enough. And since it's worth mentioning, the idea that Sakura would try to take Sasuke out after he's become a mass murderer isn't actually that bad, but rather than seeing her fight him for a little bit, which could have been cool, we see Sakura fail to attempt a very obvious stab so that Kakashi can get yet another fight in the series and Naruto can save her again. Before anybody says she couldn't have matched his power, that didn't stop Kishimoto from having Sasuke beat Deidara, so she could have at least gotten some hits in. Sakura doesn't need to be in every fight, but she only plays a major role in pretty much just 3 or 4 focal battles, which is not a lot for a series based around fighting. Don't get me wrong, Sakura and Chiyo vs. Sasori is awesome, maybe my favorite fight in the whole series, but just like we don't see her train, we very rarely get to see how her skills update. Plus, her method of getting close to Sasuke is to pretend that she's still interested in him, which is also exactly how she tries to get Naruto to not fight Sasuke for his own safety. Kishimoto comes up with these great ideas for these battles that are like chess with ninjas, but then when he needs Sakura to come up with a plan, he's got one idea: romance. We see this with Hinata as well. People validly dislike Sakura's tactics here, and it's hard to argue it isn't poorly written, but I feel this poor writing stems from how Kishimoto writes female characters specifically, not anything inherently wrong with the idea of the character of Sakura. And that brings us to how Sakura doesn't actually have any friends that are girls. She used to be great friends with Ino, but of course they stopped being friends because they both like the same boy. But no, even beyond that, we almost never see her interact with the other kunoichi of Konoha, and never see her actually get into deep friendships with them. She's friends with Naruto, and to a much lesser extent Sai, by the end of the series, and she has a professional apprenticeship with Tsunade, but she never gets to actually form many strong bonds, which is another major theme of Naruto. Shikamaru and Choji, Naruto and Gaara, Kakashi and Guy, the whole series is centered around these strong friendships. Sakura never really gets a wonderful friend like those 6 do, and I'm hard-pressed to think of any women or girls in the series that do either. To this point, I'll give the filler episodes of the anime some credit. They actually do flesh out friendships within the Konoha kunoichi much better. But of course, if I'm talking about how dirty Sakura got done, I have to again mention that after years of physical pain and emotional distress at the hands of Sasuke, she still ends up marrying him, never completely losing her infatuation with him, and rationalizing to herself his behavior at the expense of her own self-esteem. Shippers and anti-shippers can argue all they like about whether or not the two love each other in universe or whether they're a good couple for a fictional story. Go ahead all you like, but I don't really care about that. Regardless of whether or not they love each other, repeatedly Sasuke belittles, threatens, and even attempts to kill Sakura. The belittling, unlike the ribbing between friends we also see occur in the series, is shown to have a negative psychological effect on Sakura. The threats are in response to her asking him to return to the village, and the attempts to kill her are when she either wants to have a conversation with him, or when she refuses to kill an injured, unarmed woman that also trusted Sasuke. And Karin, like Sakura, forgives similar physical abuse due to her infatuation with Sasuke. Intentional or not, the story carries the message that abuse isn't really that big of a deal. And that's not a message I enjoy seeing in any form of media, let alone a series that's marketed to children. Just like with my Neji video though, I don't want to end on a completely negative note. I want to talk about what a writer could potentially hypothetically do to fix these problems. To start, I think it's pretty obvious that if you want Sakura to be a main character on the same level as the other 3, she should get as much panel or screen time, or at least comparable amounts, dedicated to seeing her work on improving herself. A surprise ability every once in a while isn't bad, but show her growth as it's happening. Don't just check in every once in a while to see, oh yeah, I guess she has been training. If this requires her to learn more individual medical jutsu, or even genjutsu, as they kept hinting she might be able to learn really well in the first part, all the better. Her motivation also shouldn't be about comparing herself to Naruto and Sasuke. A line here or there is one thing, but focus on the many good reasons she would want to study under Tsunade, both for medicine and for strength, not out of a sense of inferiority. Have her get close to Lee during his recovery and see how important medicine is. Let her draw with Ino itself, speak to her want for improvement. Don't make her compare herself to the boys around her, especially because we know Kishimoto was never going to make anybody else really come close to those two. Also have her participate in more fights, without even adding any major fights to the series, which I think you could. Just by swapping things a little, you could have her influence a much wider series of events. During the Konoha Crush, both she and Temari basically do nothing. Why not have combat between them instead of having them stand on the sidelines? Let her spar with Kabuto during the Tenchi Bridge arc, a fight between two healers that are both trying to deal with bigger things at the moment. Give her the fight the anime opening hinted at during Pain's invasion, and show Sakura versus Conan. That would be amazing. Swap Kakashi's fight with Sasuke at the 5 Kage Summit with her, or have it be a 2-on-1 if you really want to drive home Sasuke's strength. This just gives her 4 more fights, but that would make her feel much more relevant, and remind you throughout the story that she is still a main character. And at most, it only takes away 1 fight from Kakashi, who would still have plenty left. It'd be a great idea to also give Sakura some more friends. Naruto develops relationships everywhere he goes. Let Sakura at least develop a single friendship that's not thrown out for a rivalry over a boy. If you want to continue what I talked about in the Neji video and develop Hinata into a more complete character and a good person, she'd be the perfect candidate for this role. We never really get to see Hinata outside of her relationship with Naruto, at least in canon. The times we see her interact with Sakura, they're shown to be amiable, but they're usually interacting about their love interests. Let the two talk about each other. With these added conversations, you can more naturally show Sakura's growth as well as have Hinata develop outside of Naruto. And ideally, this would allow us to check up on the hypothetical Hinata's attempts to stop the Hyuga clan's reliance on slavery, as opposed to the apathetic to slavery version that we got. Plus, especially early on, Hinata's humility would rub off on Sakura, who needs to let go of some pride and see other people in a more empathetic light, and Sakura's assertiveness would rub off on Hinata, who needs to let go of some of her fears and have more confidence in herself. Their strengths would support each other's weaknesses, and they'd both get more time in the story as a result of their friendship. And of course, there are several other great options for friends. I just think Hinata would be the most obvious choice, and it would really help improve the story. Lastly, when it comes to her relationship with Sasuke, I really think you'd have to go one of two routes. Either you greatly reduce the amount of time she feels bad because of him, endures his abuse, and suffers physically from him, or you don't have the two of them end up together. Again, I'm not interested in ship wars, I really don't care. Just as a matter of what message you're sending to children, things would ideally be different. Like I said, I like Sakura as a character, as a concept, and I'm far from alone. But if just a handful of changes were taken, not only would she likely be even more popular than she already is, but more impactful and well written. It's not like Kishimoto is perfect at writing male characters, but I really do think that his weaknesses often stemmed from misogyny. A little work around those problems, and I think the great potential could really shine through. Also, if you removed all the parts where characters would hit each other or spy on each other in the bath, or all the inappropriate immature stuff, that would also make it a lot better. I think that could really benefit the series as well.